Let's go gambling! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it!
Hey everyone, how you doing? So, Plants vs. Zombies 2. Yeah, that's a controversial game. In recent times, PvZ2 has begun to garner a lot more appreciation for what it is, but back in the day, even talking about this title in a positive way was taboo. You have to remember that PvZ2 does a lot of things differently compared to its predecessor, and not all of those changes were seen kindly. As an example, some plants are paywalled now, and more specifically, some of these plants were never paywalled to begin with in PvZ1, which is definitely upsetting to this day. But when we flip to the other side of the spectrum, there's a ton of solid changes too. What I specifically look at here is the sheer volume of content this game offers, with how often there's new levels flooding into the game, along with how unique some of the level gimmicks get. It's a give and take experience, but it's one that I believe is overall better than the first game. Though, on the topic of changes made to the game, there's a pretty interesting one that's lingered in my mind for a while, and it's one that hasn't really been discussed on YouTube much at all. And that change is the addition of gacha elements in the game. This might seem like it's coming out of nowhere, especially if you're unfamiliar with gacha gaming in general, but that's exactly why I want to make a video on this topic. I think it's absolutely fascinating and worth discussing. So in today's video, join me as we discuss a taboo part of PvZ2's history, one that rarely gets coverage on this platform. Let's talk about the gacha-fication of Plants vs. Zombies 2, and how it's not such a bad thing. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves here, we have a lot to discuss. So let's immediately start with the simplest section. What is a gacha? It's actually a surprisingly complex topic in of itself, one that has lots of history, specifically in real life, because that's where the definition comes from. I think it's time to brush off the old Wikipedia and look at what the originating definition of a gacha is. Okay, it's definitely not the smallest administrative unit in Inner Mongolia, but I digress. Although, there's still some history behind gacha as a word, so here's a quick history lesson. In the 1960s, a certain type of toy began to boom in the world, specifically in Japan, called a gashapon. Gashapons, which are also referred to as gachapons, that's where it ultimately came from, are a double definition for both a type of vending machine that dispenses toys and other trinkets, and the toys/trinkets themselves. You never know what you'll get, since more often than not, the toys are completely concealed, whether it be in a box in your local Target, or it be in a vending machine in your favorite Mexican joint that's 10 minutes away and amazing. Okay, too personal? Well, regardless, you get the point. In layman's terms, you're gambling for the chance of getting something you really want. It's a simple concept, but one that you can immediately see getting out of hand if it's taken further. And, well, it has been. Gashapons have exploded in popularity around the world, as nowadays they're often marketed with characters from your favorite Japanese anime or manga, as well as video games. And what's more, these purchases are typically pretty low priced, only being roughly $1 on average, though some do net higher prices for higher quality as well. And of course, with all good products in the world, a second-hand market exists for gashapons that end up being sold at much higher prices for the sake of getting what you really want. This isn't all that relevant for the video, but it's still something worth mentioning, since both elusivity and exclusivity are key components in the gacha gaming sphere. And speaking of that, this is where the term for a gacha comes into play for our video here. Gashapons are walking so that gacha games can run. The term game is broad, as stuff like board games are also counted here. And interestingly enough, that's actually where gacha games originated, specifically in the 90s with card games like Magic the Gathering and Pokemon. Have you ever wondered how most cards aren't something you can just buy outright? Yeah, that's a key element of a gacha. And as time went on, gachas got more and more elaborate, to the point where we're at now with mobile games having gacha elements all over them. You've likely played at least one gacha game without even knowing it, since it's so normalized. And with that being said, I actually want to touch on this a bit more for our next section, which is, what makes a gacha game a gacha? Now, considering how broad gacha gaming is as a term, we need to review the origins we just discussed to properly get a consensus on how they really work. For this section of the video, I'll be using a few games from different companies to properly demonstrate the way all are similar at their core, but different in their approaches. For my first set of examples, we have Honkai Star Rail and Zenless Zone Zero. Both games use more or less the exact same system, one that the company MiHoYo popularized, the 50/50 system. I'm gonna greatly shorten the explanation on this one, since it's a little more complicated than it really needs to be. Both games have limited banners and standard banners, and these both cost 1 pool for each respective type of banner. As an example, for Zenless, I'd ideally want to buy master tapes for the standard banner. The banners themselves have a specific target that you could possibly get at any time, which most call 5-star units. Most of the time, you'll get an equivalent of a 3-star piece of equipment for an individual pull, but every 10 pulls you'll get a guaranteed 4-star unit or piece of equipment. And once you get into the range of 75 pulls or higher, your chances of getting what you really want are astronomically increased, with a catch. There's a particular level of evil to how MiHoYo handles these banners, and the 50/50 system is what really messes people up. Remember how I said you could possibly get the targeted 5-star unit? That's not a constant. That's only a 50% chance, with the other 50% being a standard banner 5-star, which isn't nearly as good. You do get a guaranteed pull for the targeted unit at 180 pulls if you fail the 50/50, but the damage is almost always done, since MiHoYo games typically only give you enough pulls to secure 1 character per update. It's an incredibly predacious gacha system, but it's one that's incredibly popular too, though in recent times it's been getting cracked down on. Once again, that's a very abridged explanation of the system, but the point still stands. As for our other examples, I point towards games like Path to Nowhere, Limbus Company, and Arknights. These games also have multiple types of banners, and while they take more notes from MiHoYo's strategy, such as increased rates for getting high tier units as you keep pulling, their base rates are always at least 1 to 2% for every pull. There's also a hard pity in all of these games after a ridiculous amount of pulls, like Arknights having 150 for the limited banners, but you're likely going to get the unit you want way sooner. There's more nuance for each of these titles respectively, but I'm sure you see what I'm getting at when I bring these up. As you can see with both example systems, the consistency is the gambling aspect. There will always be a level of gambling in these games, no matter how much you'd like to avoid it. Even in a game like Battle Cats, where you can pull predict using an external software, still has gambling built into the gameplay loop. Now, with this being said, you don't necessarily have to pull on any banners, since some of these titles give you great non-gacha units that can be maxed out. But I'm sure you could see just how addictive these titles can be with their systems. And of course, there's more that can be added to that point. Another major aspect of gacha games is their grind, which is an absolutely iconic part of each title. When I say grind, I really do mean grind. We're talking it takes on average a month to max out a unit's stats in Honkai Star Rail, among other things. To say that these games treat inconsistent gamers poorly is a massive understatement. It's pretty bad. They want you to log on every single day to play, and they all use another key element of gacha games to do so, which is constant content feeding. These games always have something going on, whether it be a simple web event or an entire new game mode. Regardless of what happens, there is always something to do in the games, which definitely makes them more appealing to unsuspecting players. There's more we could talk about in general, but I feel like we should finally get to the heart of this video, which is the current state of PvZ2, while we ask the question, what gacha elements does modern PvZ2 have? This is where I'll finally discuss my crazy thoughts, and as some would say, it's about time. Bad joke, sorry. Anyways, PvZ2 wasn't always like this, and anyone who's played the game for a while could easily tell you that much. I mean, old PvZ2 didn't have anything going on monetarily besides being able to purchase plants directly and being able to skip worlds. For a good while, there wasn't anything that could really incite the player to spend. Until an update in early 2017, when PopCap decided to remove the strategy from PvZ2 via a leveling up system. This sparked some controversy, to say the very least, but from that update onward, the monetization model switched to include seed packets in its dubious consumer plans. Ooh, evil. To better show what the system looks like nowadays, let's take a look at the way you can get plants in today's game. So, all plants in PvZ2 past the mints are called seediums. Seediums are these plants that need a minimum of 100 seed packets to unlock, and said seed packets can be obtained in many ways, which mostly boils down to grind, direct purchases, or limited pinatas, in which some happen to have an unset consistency for getting what you want. Oh, okay. Yeah, Now, this doesn't outright make PvZ2 a gacha in of itself, nor would I even suggest that. But when you compare it to the other aspects of what PvZ2 tries to accomplish, it definitely seems odd. Another consequence of the leveling system that brought said seed packets with it is the addition of the grind for the packets, which I did touch on just a second ago. There are several ways to grind in PvZ2, ranging from the more conventional methods, such as Penny's Pursuits and Arena, to the more taboo methods, like farming seed packets with Rent the Plant, a system that gives the player seed packets for bringing a plant that they don't own into a level. The much more consistent methods are definitely the conventional ones, and I want to elaborate on them a lot more. Penny's Pursuit is first up on the chopping block, and this mode tests your skills by throwing you into 5 different stages that give you unique challenges, such as needing to achieve a certain score or needing to protect some special plants. Whatever the case may be, you need to at least have most adventure plants in the game before tackling these, but there's also higher tier levels that raise the zombies levels, and these are all basically impossible with level 1 plants. So immediately, this mode wants you to have good plants and good levels for said plants, since every time you beat a level, you get a certain percentage on the Zomboss bar down here. This bar leads you to a special Zomboss fight, one where you can keep defeating him and reaching higher and higher scores within an allotted time limit before the level ends, and you get presented with seed packets and other goodies for succeeding. It's a very simple cycle, but the gacha elements rear their ugly heads here, with how there's an energy system to play these levels, as well as the requirement of good enough plants to compete. Not to mention the idea of every Penny's Pursuit target plant being weekly, which means that sometimes you just won't be able to grind at all for whatever is sitting there. It's a pretty dirty process overall, and Arena isn't much different. This game mode is a quote-unquote PvP mode, where you and a random opponent duke it out and try to rack up as many points as possible within a set time limit in an endless level. But wait, there's more. On top of this endless mechanic, you also have some plant families which are buffed, nerfed, or can't do damage at all. So basically, this mode can limit the best plants you have, and simultaneously pit you against people who have way better plants than you do, which is not uncommon. Yeah, this game's unbalanced. This isn't even getting into the massive cheating issue the game mode has, but that's frankly not worth discussing in this video. What is worth discussing is how Arena marks up its seasons. See, PvZ2 is pretty generous when it comes to unlocking new plants, as they give you just enough free seed packets to get the newest plants, as long as you grind Arena. Also, did I forget to mention that Arena isn't free to get into? Wow. Anyways, you get better rewards for winning matches than losing them, which only incentivizes using the best plants even more, and especially level plants at that. So it's essentially a feedback loop of grinding, praying you get enough seed packets, and if you don't worry, some pinatas in the store can help you there, especially ones which give randomized seed packets that might have the plant you want. The game is still very playable, you just have to be in the long haul for it. But don't worry about that, there's plenty to do in the game too. In fact, the game has more choices of content now than it ever has before, because now there's weekly quest lines called Plant of the Week that are somehow different from Penny's Pursuit that give you seed packets for those feature plants, and there's a daily login reward, sometimes several for specific events like Lunar New Year's, which, speaking of, has an entire quest line. Okay, I know this is information overload, but that's kind of the point. It's almost overwhelming, and especially on this level, and this information overload truly parallels the gacha sphere in so many ways. Okay, so with everything presented, I hope my point makes more sense now. I would never go so far as to say that PvZ2 is a gacha nowadays, but it exhibits so many elements of what makes a gacha game a gacha that at this point, it shouldn't be ignored. But I'm not gonna sit here and act like it harms the game a ton, because honestly, it doesn't. You can play PvZ2 fine to this day, and I mean, it's not like gacha elements ever kill the game. I did mention this game before in the video, but Battle Cats itself is a very interesting title. It didn't actually start as a gacha, it just had those elements added on later. And now look at it, it's one of the most popular mobile games ever. That's nothing to scoff at, and it shows that a good enough game can still be fun with these elements in it. I mean, heck, look at my Honkai Star Rail accounts. Yes, accounts. I have 3, 2 of which are nearly max level and have almost fully built teams. I hardly play this game, it's ridiculous. So where does PvZ2 stand nowadays? Is it better or worse than it was before? Well, I think that's a question that could be best saved for another time. Honestly, it's not really something I want to discuss anyways. So, I think I'll end this video on a high note. Despite PvZ2 having a lot of gacha elements, it could always be a lot more dangerous. It could be PvZ2C, which is literally a gacha. And I just remembered that PvZ2 got rarities for each plant leaked recently. Oh no. Also, 2C is still somehow less grindy than International, but that's neither here nor there. And with that, I think I've yapped for long enough. Thank you all so much for watching until the end, I really appreciate it. I'll admit, videos like these are a pretty different thing for me, but I really wanted to make one like this for a long time. This topic is just fascinating to me, so I knew I had to dip my fingers into the cherry pie, metaphorically speaking. And I'm glad I did, because it changed my perspective on a lot of things regarding PvZ2 as a whole. Now, whether that's a good or bad thing is not the topic of this video, but it's still interesting nonetheless. Though that's just my thoughts. How do you guys feel about this? Do you agree with my perspective on PvZ2's elements? Do you not? Tell me your thoughts and more in the comments down below. Also, if you're new around here and you like what you saw, maybe consider subscribing too. It'd help me out a ton and I'd really appreciate it. And finally, I'd like to give some shoutouts to my extra YSI channel members. These being Dan B, Envious, Erukiro, Glitch into Code 867, Johnny Homeowner, Mop, Nicholas Vankowski, and Song. Alongside my other members, thank you all so much for your continued support, y'all rock. And now, as for me here, I'm gonna go to the fridge gacha and hopefully pull a 5-star sandwich. Peace.
저희 쪽에서 준비가 되면 말씀드릴게요.
저기! 그렇다면 비치 볼리볼!